What's going on, YouTube? So today I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts and some of my opinions on inflation. And in particular, I wanted to talk about QE, or quantitative easing, right? Let's talk about what QE is. I wrote down a couple of little notes about, for those who might not be, aware of what quantitative easing is and how it's used as a tool by the central banks to stimulate the economy, right? So basically, quantitative easing is a monetary policy tool used by central banks to stimulate the economy when traditional interest rate cuts are no longer effective. Examples. So I'll give you here some examples of quantitative easing, right? This is basically what the government did, or the central banks did, during COVID time, okay? Central banks purchase assets, right? Makes sense. These assets can include government bonds, mortgage-backed securities, and even corporate bonds, right? When the government starts buying these assets, they go up in value because they're backed by the government, and many investors want to jump into that market, and that severely inflates the prices of these assets, okay? That's one way of quantitative easing, or to stimulate the economy. Another way, or another tool that the Federal Reserve or central bank, another tool that they use to stimulate the economy is increasing the money supply, right? So basically the central bank, or the Federal Reserve, injects money into the banking system. And what that does is it allows more reserves in the banking sector, which gives the banks the ability to loan people more money more freely, right? The banks have more money. The banks are in the industry of selling money. That's what they do for a living. How do the banks make money? They sell you money. They give you a loan, and in return, they're going to get rewarded with an interest rate, so long as you don't default, okay? Lowering interest rates. This is another tool used by the federal government to stimulate the economy. Cheaper business loans, cheaper automotive loans, lower credit card interest rates, and most importantly, mortgage interest rates. When the Fed cuts rates, interest rates on all of these things goes down, stimulating the economy. When interest rates are low, the demand for cars, houses, Rolex watches, jewelry, business loans, automotive loans, all of those things go through the roof. We know this to be factual. Like, this isn't really speculative. This isn't up for debate. Everybody saw what took place during COVID, and the inflation rate got out of control. This is one of the effects of quantitative easing, right? So on one hand, the government stimulates the economy because we were going to go into a global depression. Had we not, we shut down the whole world and we're not going to give people free money. What do you think is going to happen? Everything's going down. So to prevent that from happening, the government's really tried to do QE, and it worked, highly effective. So that's basically the goal, right? When you think about what is QE and what's their purpose, it's to prevent a depression or recession from taking place, right? So they stimulate the economy, give everyone some juice, give everyone a bunch of Red Bull, give everyone a bunch of free money, right? So let's talk about some of the effects, right? The negative effects of quantitative easing. I can tell you firsthand that I've heard stories from people I know who purchased G-Wagons for $300,000 because interest rates were low and the demand for G-Wagons was through the roof. On top of there being a supply crunch shortage, there weren't very many G-Wagons, Hellcats, all different types of cars, right? Ford F-150s, Broncos. And as a result, these dealerships, they jacked up the prices of all their cars. You want a G-Wagon, dog? We'll get you the G-Wagon, but it's gonna run you about $250 to $300, homie. When normally they're about $150, $160-ish, right? So this is the effects. It happened with everything. The price of Rolex watches, G-Wagons, houses went through the roof. I know this to be factual. Everybody knows this is facts, right? When the government lowers interest rates and gives free money to everyone, this is what happens. You get inflation, right? The house across the street from me sold. I grew up in this neighborhood when I was a kid. The house across the street from where I live sold probably 3 or 4 times in the last 4 years, right? And it went from 500 to 650, 650 to 750, 750. It went 5 months later. The guy put it on the market for 950. It didn't sell for 950. It went for over $1 million. Never happened in history, but this is the effects of quantitative easing, right? Not to mention the things that took place. I've heard stories of people. I want you to understand, in case you weren't aware of some of the amount of fraud that took place. I'll give you an example, and I know this to be factual, okay? Like, this isn't speculation, this is fact. This happened in Los Angeles County. The banks and their lending standards were so subdued and so relaxed that there were literally people incarcerated inside the Los Angeles County jail system, okay? They're gangsters. They can smuggle in drugs, they can smuggle in cell phones, and they're going on their cell phone. This is how, by the way, they get information about you and what your criminal record is. You know, they have cell phones in there. They can Google you and search you up and find out whatever they want, right? They got cell phones in there, right? These kids were inside LA County Jail with their smuggled cell phones, applying for unemployment insurance benefits, and everybody in California was getting approved. Everybody. They were then taking that money that they were getting from unemployment insurance and putting that on an application as a source of income for an automotive loan. Ford, Dodge, Ram, whatever, doesn't matter. They were applying for automotive loans on their cell phones, and their source of income was unemployment. Ford Motor Credit didn't do a thorough job, right? And just gave these people the money. Ford and General Motors and Mercedes-Benz and BMW of America, they were incentivized. They were told to, by the government, to lower their lending standards and not do credit checks. They were giving everybody, their kids were inside county jail applying for automotive loans and getting approved, using their source of income, unemployment as a source of income, to get a freaking car. And this could all take place because of COVID, under the disguise and shield of COVID, right? They didn't have to be in there to sign the documents. They could do it online, right? And then they could have the car delivered to their homeboy's house, right? And their homeboy would pick up the car, drive that thing right down to Mexico. Bye-bye Hellcat. So this happened with everything. This happened with Porsches, G-Wagons, Rolexes, whatever, okay? Just so you can get a little bit of insight as to some of the amount of fraud that took place in Los Angeles County, right? Rampant everywhere, right? I remember my neighbor across the street, he got raided straight up. The SWAT team went in there, they blew in the windows, flew a little drone in there, and this kid he had 20 or 30 unemployment cards, he had AK-47s, all this crazy stuff, crazy things going on during COVID time, right? So this is what happens. This is what happens. And basically, QE really is inflation. That's all QE does. It inflates bubbles, it inflates assets prices, it inflates everything. Cars, automotive, businesses, stock markets, housing, real estate. Everything goes up. When the government prints money and lowers interest rates and gives it to everyone for free, everything goes through the roof. Inflation. That's the effects. Now let's talk about QT, quantitative tightening. For those who don't know, it's basically the opposite of quantitative easing. And I'll give you some examples. Quantitative easing is a contractionary monetary policy tool used by central banks to decrease the amount of liquidity or money supply within the economy. Basically, what they do is they act as a vacuum and they suck up a bunch of money from the banking system, pull all of that liquidity back, and burn the money. So there's less dollars circulating throughout the economy, which leads to less transactions. That's one tool, is by reducing the money supply. The less money that is circulating throughout the local economy, the less likely people are to be spending money. There's less dollars, literally physical less dollars circulating throughout the economy, right? Another thing that they do is, in quantitative tightening, is they reduce their asset sheets, right? Or central banks reduce their size of their balance sheet by selling their assets they acquired during quantitative easing, like bonds, right? Which makes perfect sense. They're going to start to reduce their holdings and the demand for bonds, government-backed bonds, right? Which is low-key deflationary, but okay. Then they also allow, their assets to mature, which is another tool they used for quantitative tightening. They also allow existing assets to mature without reinvesting the proceeds. Makes a lot of sense. It's pretty simple. They also raise interest rates. And we're already starting to see the effects of interest rates going up. What happens when you go from zero interest rate policy to 5.5% federal funds rate policy? The demand for business loans, automotive loans, mortgage loans, credit cards, all of those things start to contract. The demand for all of these things start to contract. We're seeing it. We're seeing it in the economy, right? If we all know what is going to take place when the government prints money and lowers interest rates by stimulating, what do you think is going to happen to the economy when they do the opposite? Can we be that naive to believe that raising interest rates and removing liquidity from the banking system is not going to have an impact on society? Come on. Of course it is. It might take a little bit of time. They say that there's a lag effect. If you raise interest rates today, you're not going to see it show up in the data, unemployment data or inflation data, for at least a year to potentially even 2 years. They say these interest rates act with a lag, and they can be long and variable, okay? This is what they say. So I just wanted to bring some of that into consideration for those who might not know what quantitative easing is and how it impacts the economy versus quantitative tightening and how it eventually will impact the economy, right? We're already starting to see it. Mortgage rate applications at a 30-year low. And if you go to any General Motors, Ford, Chevrolet, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, you drive to any one of their parking lots and you'll see a full lot because the demand for cars is not there. Not to mention the fact that Germany, Volkswagen is headquartered in Germany, right? Germany's in recession, Why? Probably because the Americans are no longer buying their products, because we're not taking out loans to buy their products. China is slowing down drastically. There's a lot of countries in Europe, all throughout Europe, that are in recession, or their economies are slowing down tremendously. It's really a globally synchronized interest rate induced macro recession, which makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense, right? So with that being said, I wanted to give a couple of examples of, how G-Wagons ain't going for 300 grand. Not anymore. You can go to the Mercedes dealership right now and get a G-Wagon for 150, 160 all day. And you could probably get any color you want. So the $300,000 G-Wagon, those days are gone. Rolex watches, they've depreciated in price substantially, right? For certain models, Submariners and, Daytonas, obviously these are a little bit more desirable. They held their value a little bit more. This is what happens when you print trillions of dollars and give it to everyone for free. Rampant fraud and severe inflation. But now we're starting to see the effects of quantitative tightening. Higher interest rates, which are more recessionary. And pretty soon we're going to start to see the unemployment rate tick up. It is ticking up. It's trending in the upward direction. But it hasn't really gone up very high. And the economy as a whole hasn't really been subdued all that much. Stock market's still at an all-time high. Nationally speaking, home prices are still up, inventory is still low, although demand is historically low. It's 30-year mortgage rate application, the lowest mortgage application rate in 30 years. So, but home prices are still up. Unemployment's historically low, home prices are up, stock market's up. Why is the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates? Why? If everything in the economy is doing so well, why is it that they started to cut interest rates? I think personally, I don't know this to be factual because I don't sit down and have a conversation with Jerome Powell, but I think it's got something to do with the banking sector, and the fact that they're probably sitting on billions of dollars worth of unrealized losses, and we haven't even seen what's going to happen with the commercial real estate industry yet. I think it has something to do with either A, the unemployment rate, or B, the banking sector. That's what I believe. So, and I guess only time will reveal that, but historically speaking, whenever the federal government starts to go on their interest rate cut campaign, what tends to happen shortly thereafter is the unemployment rate skyrockets. That's not according to me. You can go on the Federal Reserve and look for yourself. The day they start cutting interest rates, shortly thereafter, the unemployment rate skyrockets. It's almost like that's a signal. When the federal government starts to cut interest rates, you know what's going to happen shortly thereafter. Every single time is what happens. It happened in 2008, it happened in 2000, it happened in 1990, and so on and so on and so on. Just about every single time it happened. So I don't know why this time would be any different. So I also wanted to talk about a couple of markets, housing markets that are suffering from deflation, right? And in particular, it'll be on the western coast of Florida, because obviously not only did they have an inventory surplus, but interest rates obviously lowered demand for housing. The amount of housing inventory in Florida in particular really skyrocketed. You know, the builders really went crazy because of their lax rules and regulations, I suppose, and maybe it's their tax benefit, I don't know. But anyways, we're starting to see home prices decline in these cities. Punta Gorda, year over year, down 7.1%. Cape Coral, Florida, year over year, down 5.2%. Northport, Florida, year over year, 4.8%. Panama City, 3.3%. Naples, 2.9%. Crestview, 2.3%. Palm Bay, 1.5%. Deltona, 1.3%. Sebastian, 1.2%. Lakeland, Florida, down nearly a point, 0.8%. Tampa, 0.8%. Key West, Florida, 0.8%. Ocala, 0.7%, and so on and so on. Port St. Lucie, 0.3%. That's just in Florida. I'm sure that this is happening in some places in Texas. I've heard Austin, Texas in particular, home prices are down from their 2021 peaks, nearly 20%. 20%. Could you imagine being the kid who sold his house in California for $1 million, right? He bought it for 500 grand. He sold it for $1 million. He took the money, went to Austin, Texas, and bought a $500,000, $600,000 house in Austin in 2021, and he could work remotely because he works for Google.com or whatever, you know, and he bought the house in 2021 or 2022, whatever it was, and now the value of his home is nearly down 20%. What do you do if you lose your job? You know, let's just pretend he bought $1 million house and now the value of his house is closer to 800,000, and he just lost his job at Google. They said, "Hey, Jimmy, you want to come back to work?" And he said, "No, dude, I'm out here." I said, "Too bad. If you don't come back in, you're fired." And now he's got an asset in Austin, Texas that just went down nearly 20%. What do you do if you're in that situation? So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of how I believe we're starting to see the effects of quantitative tightening and where that could potentially lead, you know, the economy in the future. So again, this isn't speculation. You know, some of the cities that I just listed this is factual. Like, this is, you know, evidence supporting it and data and information supporting that. Is this going to happen nationwide? I don't know. I wish I knew. If I did, I'd be a multi-billionaire. You know, I'm just doing my best to try and acquire as much information as possible and optimize myself to make strategic investments for the future. You know, create a better life and more wealth for myself and my family in the future, right? That's the end goal. So anyways, I just wanted to give you some of my thoughts, and I also wanted to end my little video that I made with a quote again from Dr. Lacey Hunt. It still stands true to me, and I value what he said. Inflation precedes recession. Serious inflationary times precede serious recessions. And that really sums it up. QE, quantitative easing, inflation, comes before QT, quantitative tightening, recession. Inflation precedes recession. So that's some of my thoughts, and I just wanted to talk to you and say thank you again for all of the people who watch my videos. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and I'll try to come up with some other topic to talk about for the next one. See you later, guys.